Hey, welcome to Caritas Querens. Our Lord said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." But have you ever felt, as a Christian, like that rest that he promises is actually rather elusive? And like oftentimes um, the people under the Pharisees who placed heavy burdens on them and would not lift a finger to help relieve them? If you have, I can relate. In my own personal spiritual journey, Um, I came to the Catholic Church seeking initially the fullness of truth and fullness of life, abundance of life promised by Christ. And within a couple years, I found myself burdened with scrupulosity. um, and if you're suffering from scrupulosity as well, or you're interested in that, I have made some other videos about that phenomenon of religious scruples. So I won't get into it in this video. But it can be very disappointing and very frustrating. Um, and I was thinking about this the other day. Um, as a Catholic, of course, we have a sacramental system in our church in which we believe that Christ has given us some signs or symbols that not only represent or signify um, some grace, but actually confer that grace. So baptism, the Holy Eucharist, for instance, and confession. And I was thinking about that, and as somebody who had suffered scruples, and to be honest, I still have setbacks today. I still find myself struggling with it occasionally. But I noticed that oftentimes the real issues with scruples came with the sacraments, or in coping with and living out the laws of the church, the rules that the church has given us to help us to become or to live better Christian lives, to live more in accordance with the life of Christ Himself. And I was thinking about that and thought it's kind of odd because we have a tradition in the Catholic Church, and even if you're not Catholic, maybe you can relate to this because you probably, even if you don't have as many sacraments or don't even have a kind of sacramental theology, probably you do have at least some kinds of signs and symbols that you use. Or even in preaching, the minister will oftentimes use anecdotes and analogies to help express a point. And so hopefully you can relate to this as well. I was thinking, um, in the Catholic Church we have this belief that Christ has given us these sacraments, and there are reasons for this. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there's a whole section talking about the use of signs and symbols and the meaning behind it and why it's there and so on. And yet at the same time, there's kind of this I want to call it like a counter tradition, but it's not really a counter tradition. It's just this parallel idea that in many cases, the sacraments, a person can receive the graces of the sacraments without actually receiving the sacraments. So, for instance, we believe that if a person dies without baptism, if they die as a martyr, for instance, we call that baptism of blood, that they can still receive the grace of being baptized, of dying with Christ and rising to newness of life with Christ, and being incorporated into His mystical body, the church, through the blood they shed for Him. Or if somebody is in preparation to become a Christian and enter into the church, and yet they die unexpectedly or they die before being baptized, they can receive what we call baptism of desire, which means that by their very intent and willful desire to become Christian and to be baptized, that they receive the grace of the sacrament, even if they have not received it outwardly. Uh, in a similar way, we believe that if a person has committed a serious sin, ordinarily we go to confession. But if a person is unable to go to confession or makes an act of perfect contrition, if they are truly sorry for it, especially out of love of God, that God can indeed forgive that sin without a sacramental confession. Or if a person is unable to receive Holy Communion, that they can make a spiritual communion by ardently desiring Christ to live in them, and in doing so, they can receive the very graces of receiving Holy Communion itself, sacramentally. So anyway, there almost seems this kind of tension between, on the one hand, the sacraments are there, And in fact, the church teaches that for the believers, sacraments are necessary, that we can't just abandon them and say, I don't need this. At the same time, that a person in various circumstances can receive the graces of the sacraments without actually receiving them outwardly. So I was thinking, well, okay, so why is that, or what's the reality here? There's this great line in the Catechism where it talks about baptism, saying that God has bound salvation to the sacrament of baptism, but He is not bound by His sacraments. So, in other words, you know, God didn't have to give us the sacraments. God could have saved us without the sacraments. Um, we could live more abstract spiritual lives, you could say, and without using concrete things like bread and wine or water. So why? What's the point? And I was pondering this the other day, and I thought, essentially, I think the most basic answer I could come up with is that He has given us the sacraments to make it easier for us, as as beings who are both who have a material part to us as well, have a physical body. He has made it much easier for us to receive His graces by giving us the sacraments. And I think by extension, we can say the Church herself is a sacrament, is a sacred sign by which Christ becomes present in a unique way to the world, and His graces conferred on the world through the Church. So even giving us the Church, giving us a visible, recognizable Church, is a way in which God ultimately has made salvation and made the process of sanctification, of being united with Christ, more and more fully united with God, has made it easier for us. He's accommodated sharing His life with us in this way. In fact, I would say that that's kind of the one of the great truths of the incarnation is, as the old adage puts it, God became man that men might become gods. In other words, God became man, took on our life and experience, not just, we say to redeem us and to save us, of course, but to, in a sense, sanctify our experience, to make even our experience a way by which we begin to be partakers of and grow in that participation in the life of God Himself. What a beautiful thing, right? So that what happened in Jesus Christ, God and man united in one person in that life here on earth, is really what He intends for all of us, to be persons walking around who have the life, human life, and the life of God united in our daily experiences and in our day-to-day living. And yet, so if He has given us the Church and given us the sacraments in particular to make it easier for us, yet I thought, why is it that for me, those areas especially were such a pain in the you know what? Why was I suffering scruples and worry, anxiety, fear about receiving the sacraments when they were given to make it actually easier for me, and to take away that anxiety and that fear and that worry? I don't necessarily have a lot of good answers for that, but part of the reason I'm sharing this is because I think that this is an area, I think that the church, I don't mean the church in the abstract sense, but I mean the church in the concrete sense of the people who make up the church. I think this is an area in which we really need to grow, and we really need to be more cognizant of how we're living out the life of Christians, or more specifically, the life of the church. Pope Francis has been coming back to this repeatedly. For instance, in speaking about accompaniment, journeying spiritually with a person, and in the upcoming Synod as well, where Christians, Catholics from all walks of life, not just the hierarchy, but even lay people and religious sisters, are gathering together to dialogue about some of the big issues of the church, issues which, in fact, were culled from surveys that were sent out. So these are issues that parishes, people from all over the world have mentioned and have contributed their ideas to. So I think that's a wonderful thing. I think this represents an opportunity for the church to be more Christ-like, not Pharisaical, and not, putting more and more burdens on people, but rather coming down there and meeting people where they're at and journeying with them and trying to help them through what they are doing, what they're experiencing, so that they can themselves learn to and begin to and learn to grow in experiencing the life of Christ in their day-to-day life. Unfortunately, there are some in the church who are very opposed to this and are casting doubts upon it and all kinds of fears and anxieties and saying that, oh, this is going to change the truth of the church and so on and so forth. And anyway, I want to ask you to pray for them. Even if you're not Catholic, pray for them. I pray for them. I pray for Christians of all walks of life, that there will be ways in which we can bring the gospel to people in a way that is easier for them to understand, to accept, to live, without diluting it, of course. I'm not saying that we water down the gospel until it essentially becomes not the gospel anymore. But there's a difference between sharing the true whole gospel in a way that reaches people where they're at, is relevant to them, and in a way in which it makes it appealing to them, and in some ways even easier for them. There's that, and there's also the kind of sense of, well, the truth is the truth that never changes, and accommodating it to people, well, that's just giving away bits of the truth. That's just compromising with falsehood, and accompaniment. That's the worst of all, because that's basically just moral relativism and throwing all objectivity out the window and so on and so forth. And I don't believe that at all. I used to be one of those people who seemed to delight in finding fault with everything and casting worries and doubts on everything the Pope was doing, and but now I pray for that, and I pray that we will reach out to people where they're at, and make it easier for people to accept the whole gospel and to live the whole gospel in their lives. So I ask you, if you're enjoying this video and if you've watched this, first of all, I would thank you for watching it, and I ask you to pray for the upcoming Synod, to pray for the Pope, to pray for Catholics around the world. If you're not Catholic, pray for believers, pray for Christians around the world. Pray that we may all come to the fullness of truth and the fullness of life, in the fullness of the gospel, in living the life of Christ truly. One last thing, I remember reading something in a book by Father William Most. He was talking about God's providence, and he speculated that in his providence that God puts people in situations in which they are best suited to be saved. And he said, speaking to Catholics, of course, he said, so in the Catholic Church, of course, there are a lot of means to help us to get to heaven, especially the sacraments that are there to make it easier for us to receive God's grace, to share in his life. And he said, so what that means is, he kind of alluded to or insinuated, he said, if as a Catholic this doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, then you don't understand what I'm saying. I think what he was trying to say, unless I don't understand it, is that if you're a Catholic, God has put you in a situation in which it's easier for you, and perhaps because he foresees that you're weaker, you need it more. If you could do it without the sacraments, then he wouldn't see it as vital to get you into a situation in which you have easy access to the sacraments. So, hey, I'm a Catholic. I know I'm weak. I'm very weak. And I'm happy to be wherever God puts me, and I'm happy to admit my weakness and to receive all that he can do to accommodate me and accompany me and make it easier for me to be united with him, to live his life. And I'm happy to have that for anyone. So I pray that I pray for this upcoming Synod. I pray for Catholics and Christians around the world. I pray that we may not be burdened, but that when we come to Christ, laboring and heavy burden, that we will truly find rest. If you have found this helpful, I would appreciate if you would like and subscribe and perhaps share with others that might benefit from this. And please, as always, put feedback down below if you'd like. Want to share your experiences? I'd be happy to hear from you. Anything you agree with, disagree with, any suggestions would be much appreciated. Till next time, adios.